For a lot of gamers, and games alike, there's a sandwich genre between AAA blockbusters and those incredibly small indie teams, and that's the AA space, sometimes called B for budget. But it doesn't matter what name it comes by, they hold a special place in the hearts of a lot of us, including myself, Vampire, Gothic, and many others, including the original Outcast. Titles that maybe don't have the juice or the PR glitz of their bigger brothers, but are created by teams trying to deliver that same big gameplay experience. Does Outcast A New Beginning deliver? Well, THQ and Appeal let me play an unlimited early beta of the game, which means some audio, graphics, and placeholder issues in spots because this isn't a final game, so be aware of that. Reviews for Rogue Trader and other games coming out this week are going live on the channel, so subscribe, hit the notify all bell. We've got 3 of them coming up. Here's my general thoughts about my time with Outcast A New Beginning. Everything about Outcast delivery is almost B-movie-like, those titles like Stargate, Indiana Jones, and The Mummy, with a focus on getting the player going in and just seeing the subtle changes they make to the game world, for better or for worse, from the very first moments. Outcast A New Beginning offers a 3-piece structure to the story, but in a very loose way, in a do-it-yourself kind of manner. Not so directed in the spiritual or moralistic delivery, but instead in a feeling of environmental mystery and helping you to experience it by understanding that the actions you take directly impact every single village and Adelpha, the planet itself. Take out enemies, make a village safe, and you get some upgrades. It's not new stuff, but its style is almost expectant, like the developers know the gamers are already aware of how those things are going to work, so a couple mentions and a suitably noticeable reward is enough to set the gamer off in whatever direction he or she wants to go to and take on the guise of Cutter Slade. And one of the places where you notice this right away is in the dialogue system, and bravo to these guys for how they handle it. There's a glossary system, and it pops up explanations of alien words in real time. It's just so simple it actually feels natural, but profoundly useful for getting a bit of information about something arcane that's mentioned. Meaning when taking quests, learning information, or just hearing characters yak about the local fruit, if a word pops up, you can hit a button and see a scroll on the right side that describes what those words mean. Even better, it actually continues on from that point and still does it, meaning that if you missed one or a mention of a different term, you can actually read about it at pretty much any time in the game. Now, I spent hours running around, exploring, taking on quests, and came away with a much better idea of what the developers wanted to do, both as the naming of the game suggests, as well as creating their own title. Highlighting this is that traveling through the world of Adelpha for previous fans, they've changed the way the alien race looks. It's a bit more humanoid versus, say, the strange camel-headed freaks that we met in the first game, and I admit it took a bit of getting used to. But luckily, the rest of the world feels like the original game filtered through a much more current lens, with Outcast's strange mix of almost spore-like creatures and otherworldly Stargate-styled locations mimicked perfectly. Jungle mountains, frozen peaks, sprawling cities, they're all here to investigate, explore, and talk to the civilians in. And exploring is one of the most celebrated aspects of the original game, and it's here in spades. Even in the beta, it's easy to see locations directly from the original game. The rice paddy-styled terraced fields with workers toiling away, just right from the original game. Geographies at times are alien and familiar, and they abound. There's fast travel that's possible, exploring is encouraged though, and due to the story, pretty much required. And exploration, of course, will lead to combat at some point, and Cutter has to help the planet by defeating the invaders that are there, and he does so by taking on those quests and then taking out enemy camps that feed back into the resources and reputation you have with the planet goers. Combat sees Cutter wielding a couple weapons with a large number of modifiable parts, changing how it uses ammo, dropping huge bombs, secret projectiles, turning them into shotguns, and anytime you aren't in battle, you can adjust it. You also have your energy shield. Enemies come in all forms, from burrowing huge worms to packs of roving animals to huge fire spiders. Yeah, fire and spiders. That's like hangnails and jammed fingers as an enemy, with them creaking around lava-like vents, spurting out and then launching into attacking you. Luckily, not only does Cutter have a different series of weapons for taking out the enemies, he also has one of the best items that ever exists in any game, and that's jetpacks. One of Cutter Slade's first items he gets is this upgradable jetpack to double jump, juke, fly, pop, dodge, and weave around enemies. You guys know me, a jump pack is pretty much like a version of a good shotgun in a game, but for traveling. I love them, and later you get a wingsuit that looks to make sure that while Cutter himself moves like a sack full of puckered assholes, he doesn't always have to. The jetpack not only adds a discrete level of movement and defense, but also a great deal of verticality that you'll use within the game. That's one place where I can't wait to play the actual final game, because Cutter isn't the most spry of people without that jetpack, and luckily the world, the quests, and the challenges are going to be based around that kind of movement. So seeing how it all comes together, something that I did get to experience while I played the game, is going to be pretty fascinating. I think that one part of Outcast I want to see is how they fill out the living world. You see, there are enemy incursions as well as natural hazards and hostile creatures, but at this time they don't always feel fully fleshed out. This is a beta, so that's expected. But it does make judging balance and longevity across the story about saving an entire planet a bit more difficult right now, depending on the length of the game as well as how that combat continues to flesh out. I don't know how I feel about the combat right now either. It has enticing hooks into the world building. For example, take on some missions to help an alien rookery, and you can then basically call down an alien aerial bombardment against the enemies. Weapons have unlocks and modifications that drastically change their firing behavior and even their use of ammo, as I said before. But currently, that part feels a tiny bit off, especially aiming. Popping up a laser shield and hearing enemies' bullets bounce off of it like flaming rain on a fire-retardant roof is awesome, but aiming itself isn't as snappy as I would like it to be. While you have a powerful up-close attack that helps you mine resources and take out enemies with no lock-on, it's got a bit of a wind-up, and you can find yourself really having to line up those moves, and a lot of times just not using it because that will end up getting you killed quite quickly if you get flanked or you get a large group around you. But the time getting from the different moment-to-moment battles is the best part of Adelpha itself, the original Outcast, and it looks like this title too. I'll say this, despite performance issues that were directly related to this early game version, the location is massive, ecosystems are solid, and the cities are huge. That's one part we see in a lot of games, where the city's just inhabited by 14 jackasses that are somehow supposed to be supplying all the food, leadership, defense, offense, and commerce of an entire city. And even after some large AAA games have come out, we've seen that continue. Outcast solidly doesn't do that. While every NPC in each sprawling city may not be a vast encyclopedia of knowledge to pass down to you, seeing children running and playing around in a more fleshed out city and a central locked-in atmosphere of scale is impressive. And what's also impressive is the way that Outcast, just like the original game, handles the main character. Outcast wants the player to feel less like a savior than we've seen in, say, games like Horizon Zero Dawn, and more like a strategist, consistently planning out what enemies to take out and what villages to help to get the best out of it. Ultimately, this has actually resolved a problem I have in a lot of games like this, the Savior Swiss Watch Dilemma, which is when the main character's overarching plot is anchored to a very specific time element that never really resonates with the player. Oh my God, you're here, you need to save us all because we're on the brink of disaster and devastation. In Outcast, it's more of a growing problem that's altered the world and planning a bit using information given to you by the NPCs, and it can feel more planned than just going and killing 19 donkeys and collecting 5 donkey hearts and bringing them back to a quest giver, which always makes you wonder where the other donkeys' hearts were. Even Cutter himself makes a comment around this during a quest, telling the NPC that he has time and bullets and a lot of them. It's almost always putting you instantly into this different headspace, even if it's altered later on. This also is reflected again in the design of Cutter. Cutter Slade comes in as a proxy for any kind of man of action that we've seen in other titles, though I do like that Cutter isn't a scrappy young buck out to prove himself, but is more of a bit tired, ho-hum military guy who isn't nearly as amazed with these awesome vistas as the player will be. Even when proof of his importance is shown, Cutter's got sort of a let's get it done kind of attitude. This is reflected again in some very smart dialogue that continues from the original game style. A couple instances when Cutter's trying to prove himself are a point and a character would argue some dogmatic position, and in a lot of games that back and forth would result in those odd portrayals and long-winded responses where the player just wants them to get on with it. But Cutter's responses are very cut and dried, and I caught at least 4 where simple logic defeated what could have been an extra quest step in another game, or some moment where the player just has to say whatever and go away with this lore that doesn't really make sense. Whether that's more direct for me in a refreshing tone, or it's going to work for all players or for some people, or even more importantly through the length of the full game, that's up for debate, but I like it. One particular example was, I breathed a sigh of relief. Cutter was interrupting a nonsensical traditional explanation and viewpoint with a very smooth, well, I'm standing right here in front of you, so both your expectations and your assumptions are obviously wrong. And the conversation actually ended in an agreement. It was just refreshingly short-paced. And if you want to see just how difficult it can be to create worlds like this, check out the Walk in the Walk videos I do, where I discuss with devs the creation of open world games, some of the greatest open world games we played, some not so great, but how the characters come together and how the worlds are built. You should see those in the cards as well as the very ending of this video. Before I move on to what everything coming together feels like, I want to shout out to the music. Outcast delivered in the original score, and it won awards, and rightfully so. Here, Lenny Moore's music continues to deliver. He worked on that game. He's working on this one. It's got the same leitmotif techniques from the original, with vocals, larger operatic and classical arrangements, combined with almost 20 years of new musical tech that lets him take those themes from the original game as well as new ones and make a score that so far is easily as memorable. Lenny isn't mentioned as much or as often in composing as some others, but when it comes to game music, so far his experience with Halo and Star Wars The Old Republic and Star Wars Battlefront 2 can actually instantly be felt. Outcast New Beginning is actually making some serious headway, and the only thing I can come away from this event was a desire to see it in its final form and how it separates itself and looks differently, because visually, this thing is incredible, even with the beta issues that I talked about before. Will it all work out? I don't know. Cutter Slade style of delivery can be stilted for a lot of people, even if it's a bit refreshing to me, and we'll see how it goes through the length of the title. The graphical presentation's excellent in many ways, but we'll need to see if some of the issues from the current version are lifted up to make it feel and play more smoothly in combat, and just make him look a little less stoved up, like he's had his entire back fused. I love the original, warts and all, and Outcast New Beginning seems like it's a solid experience after so many years. Time will tell. But as Cutter says, he has time and he has bullets, which is good because you're going to need them both. I'm happy the devs in the pub were so open with letting me just check everything out in this, because there's a ton here. And as a prior Outcast fan, revisiting the original world is something I have thought about for 2 decades, since they actually introduced the idea of a sequel pretty much the next year once the original was released, and we've waited all this time. So far, I'm pretty excited still. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week. Subscribe, check out the Patreon.